Picture this. You wake up one morning to find a 6-foot-deep trench dug around your whole property like a fortress moat. And your HOA president is standing there with a shovel grinning. That's precisely what happened to me. I stepped outside for my morning coffee and discovered myself completely isolated on my own land. No way to drive my truck out, no access for emergency services. Just me, my home, and a huge earthen wall that sprang up overnight like some deranged earth-moving scheme. The odor of diesel fumes lingered in the early air as the work crew hightailed it away. But here's what truly got my temper flaring. There was Bethany Cromwell, our community's self-proclaimed ruler, overseeing the entire job at daybreak as if she ruled the world. Too bad for her. My surveillance cams recorded every scoop of dirt. What would you do if you found yourself imprisoned on your own land? And where are you viewing from? Please tell me your HOA isn't this totally deranged. Let me rewind and explain how this horror show began. My name's Marcus Whitfield, and 6 months back, I believed I'd found heaven. After 22 years as an Army electrician and a divorce that left me penniless and shattered, I inherited my grandmother's spot in Pinedale, Colorado. 2 acres of high country haven with a 1940s farmhouse that still echoed with the aroma of her cinnamon buns. Each morning, I'd relax on that encircling porch with my brew, hearing pine needles snap under deer feet and inhaling air so clean it made Phoenix seem like breathing tailpipe smoke. The fragrance of pine resin and dawn chill reminded me why my grandmother never departed this spot. She'd created something enduring here, something authentic. I should have realized it was too perfect to endure. Enter Bethany Cromwell, 45 years old, equipped with a real estate license and the demeanor of a shark in a designer outfit. Imagine your most dreadful HOA leader, then amplify it by 10. She piloted a white BMW SUV with personalized PSB plates and carried herself as if she'd single-handedly pioneered high-altitude living. Bethany had relocated to Pinedale only 3 years prior, but behaved as though she'd established the town herself. The clack of her luxury heels on my wooden porch turned into the theme music of my private torment. She dominated our 4-member HOA board via sheer bullying, transforming community gatherings into her own tribunal. I saw her bring a 70-year-old pensioner to sobs over a mailbox allegedly 3 inches too high. That ought to have been my alert. The initial violation notice showed up on my door like a fatal decree. Non-compliant buildings must be dismantled within 30 days. They demanded I tear down my grandmother's chicken coop and storage shed, structures that had survived 40 Colorado blizzards while Bethany was likely still in training pants. The penalty, $150 daily, effective right away. I chuckled initially. Must be an error, correct? Incorrect. The weekly checks began at once. Bethany would show up without warning, armed with her tape measure and camera, cataloging everything from my work vehicle in my driveway to single strands of grass she considered overgrown. Her overpowering scent would drift in the crisp air for hours post-visit, as if she were staking her claim. Then the nameless accusations rolled in. Noise infractions lodged when I operated tools at midday during the week. Reports of dubious behavior when locals dropped by for electrical assistance. One gripe alleged my grandmother's 40-year-old oak was a sightline blocker diminishing home values. But here's what really ignited my rage. I wasn't her sole victim. She was methodically tormenting every long-standing household in our 47-house subdivision. Harold nearby received citations for his spouse's remembrance plot. Sarah Chen dealt with $500 monthly penalties for her children's play structure. 3 households had already liquidated and escaped instead of battling her courtroom assaults. I devoted my first weekend poring over local regulations at the courthouse, enveloped by the dusty aroma of ancient files and mounting anger. Every one of my grandmother's buildings was fully compliant, exempted long before any HOA came into being. I dispatched Bethany a registered letter with duplicates of all the proof. She replied by multiplying my penalties. That's when I began probing the HOA's founding papers. Military intel skills linger, and something in Bethy's documents reeked worse than spoiled seafood. Indeed, the land borders in her setup filing were inaccurate, shifted by 50 feet in several spots. More crucially, per my grandmother's initial deed and all county maps, my parcel had never been lawfully part of any HOA domain. Bethany had been extracting fines from land she had no power over. My follow-up registered letter outlining this awkward truth received the identical reaction as the first. Total quiet, trailed by intensification. That's when I grasped this wasn't about community norms or home worth. This was about domination, bullying, and organized pilfering masked as public service. Bethany Cromwell sought a battle. Okay. But she'd just initiated conflict with the wrong ex-soldier. Time to demonstrate what 22 years of armed forces troubleshooting entailed. 2 weeks following my second disregarded letter, Bethany ramped up to all-out assault. I returned from a work location to spot a county compliance officer in my driveway, notepad ready, and a somber look that said it all. "Mr. Whitfield, I'm here regarding reports of an unauthorized vehicle repair operation on this site." I gawked at him as if he'd sprouted another head. "Vehicle repair operation? I'm an electrician." He displayed the grievance form, complete with images that portrayed my workspace as some sort of illicit garage. The shots depicted several cars in my driveway, equipment strewn about, and what seemed like professional-grade auto maintenance underway. Never mind that the several cars were really my neighbor Harold's pickup and Sarah Chen's van, both receiving basic wiring fixes as friendly gestures. The images were sly. I'll credit Bethany that. Snapped from perspectives that made my legitimate tasks appear shady, edited to obscure details, and dated precisely when my daughter visited with her partner's truck. She'd twisted 3 neighbors aiding one another into proof of illegal ventures. "Sir," I informed the examiner, "I've been assisting locals with wiring issues, not operating a company. These pictures are intentionally deceptive." He appeared understanding, but shrugged. "I must investigate all reports, sir. Care if I inspect the area?" 20 minutes on, he conceded there was clearly no vehicle repair company, but the harm was inflicted. Bethany had created a record of questionable business activity in the official logs. That afternoon, I reached a choice that would alter the course. I headed to the tech shop and acquired 8 security cameras with online backup and movement notifications. If Bethany wanted to engage in photo tricks, I'd serve her a dose of sharp clarity. The setup consumed 3 days of precise cabling and placement. I ensured every bit of my boundary was monitored, with extra focus on zones of prior checks. The units were top-tier, equipped for low light, and fully lawful as they solely watched my own grounds. The initial reward arrived within a week. My device pinged with a motion warning at 5:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. I turned in bed and launched the program, anticipating a deer or perhaps Harold strolling his pup early. Instead, I observed Bethany Cromwell sneaking through my backyard in the early gloom, snapping shots of my workshop panes with a long lens. The sound was perfectly audible. If I can snag images of wiring gear, I can allege he's doing unlicensed contractor jobs. I had her caught red-handed, intruding on my land while scheming her next bogus report. But rather than facing her right then, I chose to allow her to bury herself further. Over the following month, my cams documented a chorus of persecution. Bethany showed up on my grounds 14 distinct occasions, always pre-dawn or post-sunset. She gauged my fence poles, photographed my power gauge, and even gathered dirt samples from my plot, likely hunting for proof of ecological breaches. The fuel odor that began wafting around my land finally clicked when I recorded her partner's digging firm, assessing my boundaries with expert tools. The footage displayed them recording dimensions, planting markers, and engaging in intense talks about access rights and service paths. But the true revelation hit when I delved into land files at the county office. Harold casually noted that the prior owner of my home had offloaded it for $40,000 under value 2 years back, saying he couldn't cope with the pressure any longer. The documents painted a tale that churned my gut. Identical sequence: infraction alerts, penalties, persecution drives, and finally a compelled transaction. The purchaser, Cromwell Properties, LLC, Bethy's brokerage firm. She'd executed this repeatedly. I spent that weekend sifting through every land deal in our subdivision over the last 3 years. 6 residences had transferred below fair price after prolonged clashes with the HOA. All 6 acquired straight or through proxies by entities linked to Bethany or her spouse. This wasn't about community guidelines. It was about methodical land-grabbing cloaked as area enhancement. My cams had nabbed her invading. My inquiries had exposed her method, but I required additional proof before acting. That's when I rang Harold and invited him for coffee. Time to see if my neighbors were prepared to resist. "Harold," I stated, displaying the surveillance clips on my computer, "how long has Bethany been tormenting this area?" His roughened hands trembled a bit as he viewed Bethany lurking around my land in the shadows. From the moment she arrived, son, from the very first moment. The conflict was no longer solely about my land. It was about rescuing our whole neighborhood from a hunter in fancy attire. Harold's disclosure unleashed the torrent. Over the next 3 days, I uncovered the full extent of Bethy's scheme. And it was grimmer than I'd envisioned. She demolished Margaret's remembrance garden, Harold shared, his tone breaking as we sat in my kitchen. The whiff of my grandmother's lavender pouches still floated from the cabinets close by, a stark opposite to the venom we were addressing. 30 years my wife devoted to those blooms. Bethany asserted they breached standard yard rules and had them uprooted while I was at the store. But Bethany wasn't finished with me. Far from it. The urgent order struck like thunder at 6 a.m. Thursday, delivered by a sheriff's deputy who seemed regretful but resolute. Per the legal docs, I was now barred from any wiring tasks on my land for 30 days due to blaze risk worries voiced by several worried residents. The session had occurred the prior afternoon without my awareness or attendance. Bethany had offered 3 specialist testifiers, all attorneys from her husband's practice, who declared my wiring efforts presented immediate peril to the whole area. She'd even supplied endorsed declarations from locals voicing dread for their well-being, but I knew none of the names. The instant effect was ruinous. $8,000 in planned wiring gigs vanished. My kitchen overhaul remained incomplete, bare cables hanging like shattered vows. Meanwhile, Bethany reveled in her courtroom win by circulating tales that depicted me as a volatile ex-military man endangering harmless households. That suffocating fragrance of hers appeared to trail me all over town now, signifying her growing domain of sway. That's when I made the wisest choice in this whole skirmish. I engaged Diane Kozlowski, a former sheriff's investigator who'd witnessed every sly tactic imaginable. My military prep had instructed me that against stronger opponents, you enlist experts. Diane's initial find made my insides sink. Your HOA head has been quite active, she remarked, laying out fiscal docs across my dining surface like offense scene snaps. Cromwell Properties acquired 6 residences in this subdivision over 2 years, all 15 to 30% under fair price. The approach was precise. Bethany would zero in on legacy families with persecution efforts, rack up overwhelming court expenses via phony grievances, then compel frantic sales at reduced rates. Her firm would resell these homes to affluent arrivals at peak value. $300,000 in fees from coerced deals, Diane went on, her digit following the cash path, excluding resale gains. But the graft web extended beyond property scams. I'd studied civic corruption in Army intel sessions, but witnessing it directly was another matter. The county checker probing my vehicle repair setup, Bethy's old dorm mate, the magistrate who'd issued that urgent halt without alerting me, golf pals with Bethy's husband, the town official rushing her complaints, her sibling's spouse. This wasn't local bullying. It was structured wrongdoing, dressed in official garb. Bethany intensified by ordering I dismantle all security cams within 48 hours, alleging they infringed on privacy. The absurdity stung like venom. When I declined, she warned of another suit for shadowing and persecution. Her partner's building team initiated daily edge checks at first light, mechanical rigs howling like anguished steel, overwhelming the serene highland dawns I'd relocated here to enjoy. They'd obstruct my driveway with gear, professing urgent fixes to HOA shared zones that mysteriously always aligned with my exit path. But Bethany committed a deadly error in her frenzy. She lodged a claim seeking $100,000 for mental anguish from ongoing monitoring. Here's where my studies in HOA regs bore fruit. Something I'd gleaned during those extended evenings examining land laws after my debut infraction alert. Her own HOA guidelines explicitly permitted security cams for area safeguarding. I possessed duplicates of messages where Bethany herself sanctioned cam setups for 3 community supporters. Her privacy claim outright opposed her association's own policies. In courtroom lingo, that's termed biased application, and it paves the way for bias allegations that can dismantle a full HOA framework. Diane obtained flawless proof of this double standard. Surveillance clips of Bethany aiding in cam installation at her closest pal's home merely 2 weeks prior to insisting I remove mine. But the genuine coup arrived when Diane's monitoring nabbed audio treasure during a midnight chat in Bethy's driveway. The peak air transmits sound unlike urban clamor, purer, crisper, with no spots for secrets to conceal. Once we remove these obstinate old households, we'll command the resource claims to the whole subdivision. Resource claims. That term struck me like a marksman's round to the heart. This wasn't about community norms or home worth. Bethany was methodically pilfering terrain that might hold millions in natural gas reserves. Each coerced transaction amassed more resource claims under her rule. My grandmother's 2 acres weren't merely my legacy. They sat atop a treasure that Bethany would slaughter for. The morning I found the trench will torment me eternally. I dozed off examining resource claim papers until 2 a.m. So when my device began alerting with motion notices at dawn, I assumed it was merely deer traversing the boundary. I was mistaken, utterly mistaken. I staggered onto my porch with coffee and grip and froze. A 6-foot deep ditch etched around my full property edge. Fresh soil heaped tall like rampart barriers. Heavy rigs still grumbling afar. Yellow helmets hurrying to load tools into vehicles labeled Cromwell Excavation LLC. The stench struck next. Fuel fumes blended with disturbed soil and something more. Terror. My own terror. Because I abruptly comprehended what genuine entrapment felt like. My security cameras had recorded the entire job. 5 hours of video displaying Bethany commanding a digging team like some crazed frontline general in a luxury safety helmet that likely cost more than most folks' rent. The sound was perfectly clear in the sparse highland air. Ensure it's deep enough so he can't drive out. That should show him not to challenge us. I snatched my phone and dialed 911. Sir, we'll send someone out, the dispatcher said. But if it's a property dispute, you'll need to contact civil authorities. Minutes later, Fire Chief Morrison arrived and delivered the knockout punch. Mr. Whitfield, your property is now inaccessible for emergency vehicles. Until this is resolved, we can't guarantee response times. Before I could process that devastating news, a county inspector arrived, the same one who'd investigated my auto repair business. This time, he was demanding I fill the trench immediately at my own expense, claiming it violated county safety codes. But I didn't dig it, I protested, showing him the security footage on my phone. He shrugged with practiced indifference. Property owner is responsible for all excavations on their land, regardless of who did the work. The trap was perfect. Bethany had vandalized my property, then used county regulations to force me to pay for repairs. My grandmother had always said, "The mountains taught you who your real enemies were." She just never mentioned they might wear badges. By noon, local news trucks were arriving. Channel 7's Jenny Morrison knocked on my door with a camera crew, having heard about the neighborhood dispute on police scanners. "Mr. Whitfield, can you tell us what happened here?" I gave her the full story, complete with security footage and financial records Diane had uncovered. But when the story aired that evening, the headline read, "Neighborhood Dispute Turns Dangerous." They'd somehow painted me as an unstable hermit fighting progress, while Bethany appeared as a concerned community leader trying to maintain safety standards. The media manipulation stung, but Harold Scourge gave me hope. That evening, he knocked on my door with a manila envelope thick as a phone book. "I've been documenting everything," he said, his weathered hand steady as granite. "Every violation notice, every threatening letter, every time they trespassed. 3 years of evidence, son." Sarah Chen appeared 20 minutes later with her own folder. "Forged HOA signatures," she said quietly, glancing around like Bethany might materialize from the shadows. "I'm a bank fraud investigator. I know fake signatures when I see them." As we spread documents across my kitchen table, the scope of Bethy's criminal enterprise became clear. She'd been systematically forging property owner signatures on HOA documents since day one. Every vote, every fee assessment, every rule change, all based on fraudulent paperwork. From my military intelligence days, I remembered that document fraud was federal jurisdiction, mail fraud, specifically when those forged papers went through the postal system. The FBI doesn't mess around with organized schemes involving government agencies, but Bethany wasn't finished. The next morning brought a new horror. Crews from her boyfriend's company had returned overnight for utility line inspections. They'd severed my internet cables, claiming the lines violated county easement regulations. My phone service mysteriously went dead an hour later. The isolation was psychological warfare, cut off from communication, trapped behind an earthen wall. Watching construction crews prowl my property line like predators. That sharp ozone smell from severed cables mixed with diesel exhaust created an atmosphere of technological violence. I climbed up onto my roof to get cell service and called Diane. They're accelerating the timeline. I told her something big is coming. She'd been tracking property records all night. Marcus, you need to see this. Bethy's real estate company already has your house listed online as coming soon. Spectacular mountain views. The listing went live yesterday. Before the trench was even dug, they weren't just harassing me into leaving. They were already selling my inheritance out from under me. That afternoon, I noticed survey stakes appearing throughout the neighborhood. Not just on my property, but on Harold's land, Sarah's yard, even around the community areas. Bethy's excavation crews were marking every original family's property for boundary clarification. The trench around my house wasn't punishment. It was a preview, a demonstration of what would happen to anyone who continued resisting her land grab operation. As sunset painted the mountains blood red, I made a decision that would change everything. So this war was no longer about my property rights or even my grandmother's legacy. Bethany was coming for every original family in this development, and someone had to make a stand. Time to stop playing defense and start fighting back. The breakthrough came at 3 a.m., while I was digging through boxes of my grandmother's papers in the basement, desperate for anything that might save our community. The musty smell of old documents mixed with my growing desperation as I searched through decades of property records by flashlight. My power had been mysteriously disconnected for safety inspection that afternoon. Then I found it. A manila envelope marked HOA Incorporation important in my grandmother's careful handwriting. Inside were the original state filing documents for our homeowners association, and my blood turned to ice water. Bethany had claimed unanimous consent from all property owners when incorporating the HOA. The signature page showed every landowner's name with what appeared to be their written approval. But my grandmother's signature was wrong, completely wrong. I'd seen Eleanor Whitfield's handwriting thousands of times, careful, precise, with a distinctive loop on the W and a flourish on the E. The signature on this document was crude, rushed, obviously forged. Someone had tried to copy her name from another document and failed miserably. My hands shook as I compared it to her real signature on a birthday card she'd sent me just months before her death. The difference was night and day. If Bethany had forged my grandmother's signature, what about the others? I called Harold at dawn. I need you to look at something immediately. 20 minutes later, he was sitting at my kitchen table staring at the incorporation documents with growing fury. That's not Margaret's signature either, he said, pointing to his deceased wife's name. She never wrote the M like that. Always had a little hook at the bottom from her arthritis. Sarah Chen arrived within the hour, took a look at her own signature, and laughed bitterly. I was living in California when this was supposedly signed. I didn't even move here until 2 years later. The scope of the fraud was staggering. Bethany had forged at least 8 signatures to create a legal fiction that our properties had voluntarily joined her HOA. In reality, she'd manufactured consent through systematic document forgery. From my research into property law during those sleepless nights, I knew this was more than simple fraud. When someone uses forged documents to claim authority over real estate, it triggers multiple federal crimes: mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, and potentially racketeering. The kind of charges that destroy lives and send people to federal prison for decades. But Deanne's investigation had uncovered something even bigger. Those mineral rights Bethany had mentioned weren't just theoretical. A 2019 geological survey had confirmed significant natural gas deposits under our entire development. The energy company's preliminary agreement was worth $12 million for full extraction rights. She's not just stealing houses, Diane explained, spreading geological maps across Mitable. She's consolidating mineral rights that could make her filthy rich. Every forced sale gives her control over another piece of a multi-million-dollar puzzle. The master plan was breathtakingly criminal. Force out original families at below-market prices, consolidate their mineral rights, then sell extraction permits to energy companies for massive profits. The new wealthy residents would get pristine mountain views while Bethany got millionaire status. My grandmother's 2 acres weren't just sentimental value. They contained mineral rights potentially worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Rights that Bethany planned to steal through forged documents and systematic harassment. Harold's voice broke as he realized the full scope. She's not just taking our homes, son. She's erasing our family's entire legacy for profit. But we had advantages Bethany didn't know about. Sarah's background in bank fraud investigation gave us expertise in document analysis. Harold's meticulous record-keeping had created a paper trail of harassment spanning 3 years. My security system had captured months of criminal activity. Most importantly, we now had evidence of federal crimes that would bring agencies with real power into our fight. The FBI doesn't negotiate with small-town corruption. They dismantle it. As morning sunlight finally penetrated my basement window, I realized we weren't just fighting for our properties anymore. We were sitting on evidence that could destroy an entire criminal enterprise disguised as community leadership. Time to take this war to a level Bethany Cromwell never saw coming. The next 72 hours felt like organizing a military operation, which in many ways, it was. My grandmother's kitchen became our command center. Her old wooden table buried under evidence folders, legal documents, and enough coffee cups to fuel a small army. Harold's grandson, Jake, arrived first. The pro bono attorney I'd heard about but never met. 35 years old, with the kind of sharp intelligence that came from handling property rights cases across 3 states. He spread out copies of Bethy's forged documents like crime scene photos. "This is federal territory now," he said, studying the signature analysis reports. "Mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy to defraud multiple government agencies. We're talking 20-year prison sentences if we can prove systematic intent." The smell of fresh ink filled the room as we printed hundreds of pages of evidence. Every security camera recording, every financial transaction, every forged signature blown up to poster size. Jake had a prosecutor's eye for detail, organizing everything into a chronological timeline that told the story of organized crime masquerading as community management. "Here's what most people don't understand about property fraud," Jake explained while reviewing mineral rights documents. "When someone uses forged paperwork to claim authority over real estate, every action they take afterward becomes part of the conspiracy. Every fine, every violation notice, every forced sale builds the federal case stronger." Sarah's husband, Tom, arrived from Denver with a truck full of investigative journalism equipment. As a Denver Post reporter, he'd covered municipal corruption before, but nothing quite like this scope. "This isn't just local news," he said, setting up cameras and recording equipment. "This is a story about systematic theft disguised as civic duty. Diane coordinated with federal agencies while we worked. The FBI had opened a mail fraud investigation based on those forged HOA documents. The state attorney general's office assigned a prosecutor to the real estate fraud case. Environmental crimes investigators wanted to pursue the unpermitted excavation charges. The beautiful thing about federal crimes," Diane explained, "is that local corruption can't protect you. When FBI agents show up with warrants, golf buddies and college roommates suddenly develop amnesia about their helpful relationships. We spent hours organizing evidence into multimedia presentations. Security footage compiled into a devastating chronological timeline. Financial records showing the money trail from forced sales directly into Bethy's accounts. Expert handwriting analysis proving systematic forgery across multiple legal documents. Harold contributed something invaluable. 3 years of detailed documentation in careful handwriting. Every harassment incident recorded with dates, times, and witnesses. His military background had taught him the same lesson mine had. When fighting superior forces, documentation becomes your strongest weapon. "My Margaret always said to write everything down," he said, voice thick with emotion. She knew bullies rely on people forgetting exactly what happened. Sarah brought banking expertise that turned financial records into clear evidence of fraud. "Look at the timing," she said, pointing to deposit records. "Every forced sale generates a commission payment within 48 hours. That's not coincidence. That's systematic profiteering from harassment campaigns. The community mobilization surprised everyone. Word had spread through social media about our Thursday town hall meeting, and RSVPs were pouring in from across the county. 23 families confirmed attendance to share similar harassment stories. 3 other neighborhoods reported identical patterns involving Bethy's real estate company. Tom's media contacts were building a story that would reach statewide audiences. Channel 7's Jenny Morrison had reviewed our evidence and committed to live broadcast coverage from the town hall. The Denver Post was preparing an exposé on municipal corruption in mountain communities. Jake prepared criminal referral packages for multiple agencies. We're not just seeking civil remedies, he explained. We're documenting federal crimes that require prosecution. Bethany and her co-conspirators need to face real consequences. The technical preparation was exhaustive. Professional surveyors confirmed the trench placement was entirely on my property, violating multiple county ordinances. Environmental engineers documented unpermitted earth disturbance across several properties. Banking experts traced illegal HOA fee collections through forged authorizations. My security system had become the prosecution's star witness. Months of footage showing systematic trespassing, property destruction, and harassment campaigns. Audio recordings of criminal conspiracy discussions. Digital timestamps that correlated perfectly with financial fraud patterns. But Bethy's desperation was escalating. Diane's surveillance had caught her attempting to flee the state after one final property acquisition. Her husband was transferring assets to offshore accounts. Emergency court orders had frozen their finances, but they were clearly preparing for the worst. The beautiful irony, Jake said, reviewing the evidence timeline, is that every escalation she's attempted has created more federal evidence. The trench, the utility sabotage, the media manipulation, it all builds the conspiracy case stronger. As we prepared for Thursday's confrontation, the emotional stakes became clear. This wasn't just about property rights or even criminal justice. We were fighting to preserve the character of a community that predated Bethy's arrival by decades. Harold was defending his wife's memorial garden and 40 years of mountain memories. Sarah was protecting her children's right to safe neighborhood play. I was honoring my grandmother's legacy and every veteran's right to peaceful retirement. The evidence was overwhelming. The legal strategy was bulletproof. The community support was unprecedented. Time to show Bethany Cromwell what happened when criminals targeted the wrong neighborhood. Bethy's final week of desperation began with sirens wailing through the mountain morning air, a sound that still makes my coffee cup rattle when I hear it unexpectedly. The sheriff's deputy, who knocked on my door at 6 a.m., looked genuinely apologetic as he handed me an arrest warrant. "Mr. Whitfield, you're being charged with assault with a deadly weapon and terroristic threatening." I stared at the legal document like it was written in ancient hieroglyphics. Assault on who? Bethany Cromwell claims you threatened her with a shovel during a property inspection yesterday afternoon. Yesterday afternoon when I'd been 50 m away buying electrical supplies in Denver. The receipt was still crumpled in my truck's cup holder. Time-stamped at exactly the moment Bethany claimed I was menacing her with garden tools. But the trap was more sophisticated than simple false accusations. Bethy's husband had recused himself from the case, too obvious a conflict of interest, and assigned it to Judge Patricia Manning, his regular golf partner and poker buddy. Emergency hearing scheduled for Thursday morning, the exact same day as our town hall meeting. The message was crystal clear. Spend Thursday in court fighting fabricated charges or face potential jail time that would silence my testimony forever. She's brilliant. I'll give her that, Jake said after reviewing the charges. Assault with a deadly weapon carries mandatory detention pending trial. Even if we prove it's fabricated, you could be locked up for weeks. Bethany had provided witness statements from her construction crew, all swearing they'd seen me wielding a shovel aggressively during her routine inspection. The paperwork looked official, detailed, and completely manufactured. But security cameras don't lie, and mine had captured something even better than my absence. They'd recorded Bethy's crew rehearsing their false testimony in my driveway the night before, discussing exactly what lies to tell police. "Make sure you say he raised the shovel like he was going to hit her," one worker coached another. "And mention his military background, make him sound dangerous." The assault charges dissolved faster than sugar and hot coffee once Jake presented the contradictory evidence. But Bethany escalated immediately to community-wide intimidation. Anonymous threats appeared on Harold's doorstep that same afternoon. "Keep quiet Thursday or face consequences." Sarah Chen called me panicking. Unknown vehicles had followed her children home from school, circling their bus stop like predators stalking prey. 3 more families received fake code enforcement violations requiring immediate compliance with impossible deadlines. The psychological warfare was designed to fracture our alliance before the town hall confrontation. But the most sinister escalation came at midnight when my motion sensors triggered repeatedly around the property perimeter. I watched through security cameras as Bethy's boyfriend crept through my grandmother's vegetable garden with a backpack sprayer, methodically poisoning every plant with industrial herbicide. The next morning, I found my inheritance garden dying. Tomato plants my grandmother had cultivated from seeds her own mother brought from Ireland. Wilting black ascancer spread through their leaves. The acrid chemical smell burned my nostrils and probably my lungs, but the emotional damage cut deeper than any physical harm. Dean's connections with agricultural crime investigators identified the poison. Commercial-grade glyphosate mixed with industrial defoliant, illegal for residential use, and toxic enough to sterilize soil for decades. This wasn't vandalism. It was environmental terrorism designed to destroy my family's agricultural legacy permanently. Audio surveillance captured Bethany ordering the destruction. Make sure nothing grows there ever again. I want that garden dead as a cemetery. Her desperation had reached psychotic levels. But she wasn't finished. That afternoon, while I was documenting the garden poisoning for police reports, she planted fake methamphetamine evidence near my workshop and called in an anonymous drug tip. Chemical smells coming from that property, the caller reported. Looks like some kind of drug lab operation. The DEA raid that followed was professionally humiliating and personally devastating. Agents swarmed my property like I was running a cartel operation, only to discover that Bethy's methamphetamine was actually baking soda mixed with cleaning supplies. The lead agent apologized profusely after lab analysis revealed the planted evidence, but the damage was done. Local news had filmed the entire raid, and Bethy's media allies spun it as investigation into dangerous criminal activity before the truth emerged. She's unraveling, Diane observed after reviewing surveillance footage. When criminals get this desperate, they make mistakes that destroy themselves. The biggest mistake came that evening when Bethany thought she was having a private conversation with her husband in their driveway. Mountain air carries sound differently than city noise. Cleaner, sharper, with nowhere for secrets to hide. Once we get rid of these old families, we'll control $3 million in mineral rights. Her voice carried perfectly to my hidden audio equipment. The energy company deal goes through next month. Then we relocate to Costa Rica with enough money to disappear forever. She'd confessed to the entire criminal conspiracy on tape, including plans to flee prosecution once the last original families were eliminated. Thursday's town hall meeting wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about stopping a criminal enterprise before they destroyed more lives and disappeared with millions in stolen assets. The war was almost over. Time for the final battle. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of mountain clarity that makes you believe justice is possible. But Bethany had one final card to play that nearly broke me completely. I woke to the rumbling of diesel engines surrounding my property like mechanized wolves. Bethany had positioned construction equipment to create an impenetrable blockade around my driveway, claiming emergency waterline repair that would require 48 hours of access restriction. The timing was surgical. I was trapped on my own property, unable to attend the town hall meeting where 3 months of evidence would finally expose her criminal empire. "Mr. Whitfield," the crew foreman said with practiced indifference, "count regulations require us to maintain work zone security until repairs are complete. Emergency waterline repair on the morning of my vindication." The coincidence was so obvious, it would have been funny if my future wasn't hanging in the balance. But Bethany had underestimated the community she'd spent 3 years terrorizing. Harold arrived at 8 a.m., leading a convoy of 30 pickup trucks filled with neighbors I'd never spoken to before. Sarah Chen had organized a social media campaign that brought families from across the county. Even people who'd never experienced HOA harassment understood that what happened to me could happen to anyone. "Nobody traps a veteran on his own land," Harold announced, his weathered voice carrying the authority of someone who defended democracy in 2 wars. "Move that equipment or we'll move it for you." The standoff lasted 20 minutes before county sheriff deputies arrived and determined that Bethy's emergency repair was actually unlawful obstruction of property access. The construction crew disappeared faster than mountain fog at sunrise. Meanwhile, Bethany was orchestrating her own counter-demonstration, and she'd hired supporters from other HOA developments, $200 each, to attend and paint me as a dangerous extremist threatening peaceful communities. Her hired crowd carried professionally printed signs reading, "Stop veteran violence and protect our families." The media manipulation was sophisticated but transparent. Local news crews filming her supporters didn't realize they were documenting paid political theater designed to discredit legitimate harassment victims. Tom's investigative journalism contacts had uncovered the payment records for Bethy's fake grassroots movement. Bank transfers showing exactly $200 paid to each concerned neighbor created evidence of fraud that would strengthen federal conspiracy charges. The drive to town hall felt like riding into battle, which in many ways it was. Jenny Morrison from Channel 7 had arranged helicopter coverage that filmed my journey from trapped property owner to community defender. The aerial footage of that earthen trench around my house would become the defining image of systematic property harassment. Bethy's final legal maneuver was attempting to suppress all security camera evidence through emergency court order. She claimed my cameras violated federal wiretapping laws and demanded sealed proceedings to protect trade secrets about mineral rights development. But Jake had anticipated this desperate move. "Your Honor," he told Judge Manning during the emergency hearing, "plaintiff seeks to suppress evidence of her own criminal activity under pretense of privacy protection. This court lacks jurisdiction over federal wiretapping charges." She and plaintiff provides no legal basis for sealing proceedings about public mineral rights. The judge's golf relationship with Bethy's husband suddenly seemed less important when federal agencies were watching every decision for signs of corruption. By 6 p.m., the high school auditorium was packed beyond capacity. 280 people in a space designed for 200 with overflow crowds listening through outdoor speakers. 3 television news crews had set up for live broadcast coverage. FBI agents and state prosecutors sat in the front row like judicial executioners. Bethany arrived with private security and a public relations handler, still believing she could spin this disaster into victimhood. Her designer outfit and professional entourage contrasted sharply with the working families she'd spent years terrorizing. The murmur of anticipation fell silent as I entered to spontaneous applause. Mountain communities understand the difference between authentic neighbors and predatory outsiders, and tonight that understanding would determine Bethy's fate. But her most revealing moment came during setup when she thought the microphones weren't active yet. Audio technicians had already begun recording, capturing her conversation with the PR handler about damage control strategies and exit planning. "If this goes badly, we implement the Costa Rica contingency immediately," Bethy's voice carried through the auditorium speakers. "The offshore accounts are already established." She'd confessed to flight risk and hidden assets before the formal proceedings even began. Every law enforcement officer in the room suddenly paid closer attention to her every movement. The evidence presentation was ready. The community support was overwhelming. The media coverage would reach hundreds of thousands of viewers. Harold squeezed my shoulder as we took our seats. "Your grandmother would be proud, son. Eleanor never backed down from bullies either." Sarah. Chen's children had made hand-drawn signs reading, "Save our neighborhood and heroes live here." Even 8-year-olds understood that sometimes adults must fight to protect what's right. The final battle was about to begin, and Bethany Cromwell had no idea how completely she'd already lost. The packed auditorium felt like a courtroom where justice had finally arrived to a forgotten corner of America. 280 people crammed into seats designed for 200, with another 50 listening through speakers outside. The air hummed with 3 years of suppressed anger finally finding its voice. County Commissioner Rodriguez called the meeting to order, but everyone's eyes were on the front row where FBI agent Patricia Henley and state prosecutor Michael Chang sat like silent judges. Behind them, Jenny Morrison's Channel 7 crew prepared for live broadcast that would reach 340,000 viewers across Colorado. Bethany entered like a politician at a hostile rally, flanked by private security and a crisis management specialist who probably charged more per hour than most people earned in a week. Her designer outfit and professional entourage seemed calculated to reinforce her image as a successful businesswoman under attack by unstable neighbors. She had no idea she was walking into a perfectly constructed legal ambush. "Ladies and gentlemen, I began standing at the podium where my grandmother had once advocated for rural school funding. I came to Pinedale seeking peace after military service, but I found a war in my own backyard. The 85-inch screen behind me came alive with my grandmother's original 1943 deed, showing her family's legitimate claim to land that predated any HOA by decades. The audience murmured as the timeline advanced, through decades of peaceful mountain living to Bethy's arrival 3 years ago. Then the security footage began playing. Gasps echoed through the auditorium as people watched Bethany directing the trench excavation at dawn, her voice crystal clear in the mountain air. "Make sure it's deep enough that he can't drive out. That should teach him to mess with us." "That's not what happened," Bethany shouted from her seat, but her lawyer grabbed her arm, realizing she was making everything worse. The evidence presentation continued relentlessly. Financial documents displayed on the massive screen showed her real estate company's profits from forced sales. $340,000 in commissions from harassment-driven property transfers. The money trail connected every violation notice to eventual financial gain, but the smoking gun was the forged signature analysis. Handwriting expert Dr. Elizabeth Santos had prepared a devastating comparison showing my grandmother's authentic signature beside Bethy's crude forgery. The differences were so obvious that audience members started pointing and whispering before Dr. Santos even explained the technical analysis. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dr. Santos testified with clinical precision, "these signatures were forged with 99.7% certainty. Whoever created these documents had no legal authority to incorporate this homeowners association." The room erupted in angry murmurs. 3 years of harassment, fines, and legal battles, all based on fraudulent paperwork that should never have been accepted by county officials. Harold's testimony brought the emotional stakes into focus. Standing at the podium with Margaret's memorial garden photos, his voice cracked as he described watching Bethy's crew destroy 30 years of carefully cultivated roses while he was buying groceries. "She didn't just kill flowers," Harold said, tears flowing freely. "She murdered my wife's memory for profit." Sarah Chen read a letter from her 8-year-old daughter. "Dear town people, please don't let the mean lady make us move away. I like my swing, set and my friends, and I promise we're not bothering anyone." 12 other families testified about identical harassment campaigns. The pattern was undeniable. Systematic targeting of original landowners through fraudulent legal processes designed to force below-market property sales. Then I played the audio recording that ended Bethy's criminal career. "Once we eliminate these stubborn old families, we'll control $3 million in mineral rights." Bethy's voice filled the auditorium through professional sound equipment. "The energy company deal goes through next month. Then we relocate to Costa Rica with enough money to disappear forever." The collective gasp was audible on live television. Bethy's face went white as she realized her private confession was being broadcast to hundreds of thousands of viewers across Colorado. "This is all lies and manipulation," she screamed, standing up, despite her lawyer's frantic attempts to silence her. This veteran used military training to wage psychological warfare against peaceful neighbors, but the security cameras had recorded her ordering my garden poisoned while claiming environmental protection. Audio surveillance had captured her bribing construction workers for false testimony. Financial records prove systematic fraud spanning multiple government agencies. FBI agent Henley stood up as Bethany attempted to leave the auditorium. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for mail fraud, conspiracy to defraud government agencies, and racketeering under the RICO Act." The perp walk was broadcast live as Bethany was led out in handcuffs past cheering neighbors. Her final words were captured by every microphone in the room. "You people don't understand what you've done. I was improving this community." "The only thing you improved," I said into the microphone as police cars drove away, "was our understanding of how criminals disguise theft as civic duty." The standing ovation lasted 4 minutes. County commissioners issued formal apologies. The HOA was dissolved by unanimous vote, replaced by a legitimate neighborhood association with rotating leadership and verified signatures. Justice had finally arrived in Pinedale, Colorado, and it came with handcuffs. Months later, I'm sitting on my grandmother's porch with morning coffee, listening to the sound of children playing freely in yards where they'd once been afraid to laugh too loudly. The trench is gone, filled with rich topsoil and planted with wild flowers that bloom brighter than any designer landscaping Bethany ever imagined. Justice moved swiftly once federal agencies took over. Bethany received 4 years in federal prison for mail fraud and racketeering. Her husband got 3 years for conspiracy and was permanently disbarred. Their construction company was dissolved. Equipment sold at auction to pay victim restitution totaling $1.7 million. The ripple effects reached further than anyone expected. Colorado passed Marcus law requiring verified signatures and independent oversight for all HOA formations. 23 other communities reported similar fraud investigations after our story went viral, leading to the largest property rights reform movement in state history. My workshop business exploded with customers from 6 states who'd seen the news coverage and wanted to support someone who'd fought back against corruption. The irony wasn't lost on me. Bethy's attempts to destroy my livelihood had actually made it more successful than ever. But the real healing happened in our community gardens. Harold transformed his wife's memorial roses into a neighborhood gathering space where families share vegetables and stories every Sunday evening. The scent of Margaret's heirloom roses mixed with fresh herbs creates an atmosphere of peace that would have made my grandmother smile. Sarah. Chen's children organized the Eleanor Whitfield Memorial Scholarship for rural students studying sustainable agriculture. $50,000 raised through GoFundMe after our story reached national attention. The first recipient is a local high school senior planning agricultural engineering studies, the kind of young person who will keep mountain communities thriving for generations. The mineral rights that nearly destroyed us became our salvation. Instead of selling to energy companies, our neighborhood voted to establish a permanent conservation easement protecting 500 acres of pristine mountain habitat. Wildlife biologists now use our area for native species research, bringing educational tourism that supports local businesses without destroying the character we'd fought to preserve. 3 families who'd planned to move away from Bethy's harassment decided to stay and help rebuild. Property values increased 15% due to national media attention showcasing our strong community bonds. Turns out people want to live in neighborhoods where neighbors actually defend each other. The environmental restoration exceeded all expectations. Where Bethy's crew had poisoned my grandmother's garden, we planted heirloom varieties from seeds Eleanor had saved for decades. Those tomatoes descended from Irish immigrants now feed 5 families every summer, proving that some legacies can't be destroyed by corporate criminals. Netflix optioned our story for a limited series about property rights and community resistance. Jenny Morrison won a regional Emmy for investigative journalism. Tom's Denver Post expose triggered federal investigations into municipal corruption across 3 counties. But the sweetest victory is personal. I'm dating again. A local teacher who says she fell for a man brave enough to fight City Hall and win. My ex-wife called to apologize for doubting that moving to the mountains was the right choice. Even my teenage daughter admits that her old man might actually be kind of cool. Every morning I check security cameras that now record only deer crossing the property line and neighbors walking dogs on newly peaceful streets. The diesel exhaust and fear sweat have been replaced by pine needles and morning frost, the way mountain mornings should smell. Harold stops by twice a week for coffee and chess, sharing stories about Margaret while planning next season's garden expansion. Sarah's kids play in yards where their parents once worried about anonymous complaints and harassment campaigns. The new neighborhood association meets monthly in my grandmother's kitchen, rotating leadership and making decisions by actual consensus rather than manufactured authority. We've established emergency funds for families facing legitimate hardships and created maintenance crews to help elderly neighbors with property upkeep. Here's what I need from you. If you're dealing with HOA harassment or know someone trapped in similar situations, share this story and tag them. Sometimes people need to know they're not alone and that fighting back is possible. And if this story helped you understand the importance of community defense against corruption, hit that subscribe button. There are more battles being fought in neighborhoods across America. And every story shared makes predators like Bethany think twice before targeting their next victim. Together, we're proving that ordinary neighbors can defeat extraordinary criminals when they stand united. The mountains are peaceful again, and my grandmother's legacy lives on. Thank you for tuning in to HOA Stories, where neighbors stand up against HOA Chirons and karma comes a-knocking. If you like this story, hit that like button, share your thoughts below, and subscribe for more HOA tales and real-life neighborhood drama each week.